Hello, my dear brothers and sisters. I didn't come here to entertain you today. I came here to tell you something that most people who came out of witchcraft will never say out loud, even after deliverance, even after they claim to be free, because the truth I'm about to share with you, it doesn't just expose darkness. It exposes something much deeper, something that still follows many of us, even after we walk away. And I know this because I lived it. I wasn't always sitting here speaking about God. There was a time when I was deeply rooted in darkness, not just curious about it, not just experimenting. I was committed. I gave my mind, my body, and my spirit to practices that most people would be too afraid to even speak about. I made agreements. I spoke words. I participated in rituals that opened doors that I didn't even understand at the time. And when I finally left that life, when I cried out to God and was delivered, I believed everything was over. I thought the moment I walked away, the moment I said, I choose light, that everything behind me was gone forever. But that's the part no one tells you, because what I discovered after deliverance shook me more than anything I experienced inside witchcraft itself. You see, many ex-witches will come online. They will tell you about spells, about rituals, about covens, about how they escaped. But they will not tell you what still lingers. They will not tell you what follows you silently. They will not tell you that deliverance is not always the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of a different kind of battle. I remember the first nights after I left everything behind. I expected peace. I expected freedom. I expected to feel light. But instead, I felt watched. Not the way you imagine in movies. Not shadows moving in the corner of the room. It was deeper than that. It was like something knew me intimately. It knew my thoughts before I spoke them. It knew my fears before I acknowledged them. It knew exactly how to reach me without showing itself. And that's when I realized something terrifying. Walking away from witchcraft doesn't automatically erase what was built in the spirit. Because what many people don't understand is this: witchcraft is not just an action. It's a system of agreements. Every ritual, every chant, every offering, every intention. It forms a connection. And even after you leave, those connections don't always disappear instantly. That's the secret many ex-witches avoid talking about. Because it's uncomfortable. Because it raises questions people don't want to answer. Because it challenges the idea that everything becomes easy the moment you turn to God. And listen carefully. I am not saying freedom is not real. I am not saying deliverance is not powerful. I am saying there is a process that most people are not prepared for. A process of breaking, not just actions, but spiritual ties. Because when I left witchcraft, I didn't just walk away from practices. I had to confront what I had become. My thoughts were still influenced. My reactions were still shaped. My instincts were still trained by darkness. And that's when the real fight began. Not outside of me, inside of me. There were moments I would sit in silence, trying to pray, trying to connect with God. And suddenly, thoughts would enter my mind that didn't feel like mine anymore. Thoughts that echoed old rituals, old beliefs, old patterns. And it confused me because I thought, I left that life. Why is this still happening? That's when I understood something that changed everything for me. Deliverance removes you from darkness, but it doesn't automatically remove darkness from you. And that is the part no one wants to admit. Others. There was no fear at first, just silence. A heavy kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. I sat on my bed, trying to pray. I called on God with everything I had. My voice was shaking, but my heart was desperate. And suddenly, I felt resistance, not around me, inside me. It was like something was pushing back. Something familiar. Something that recognized the words I was speaking. And that's when it hit me. My spirit had been trained to respond to darkness, not to light. You see, when you spend time in witchcraft, you don't just perform rituals. You align yourself. Your thoughts begin to shift. Your reactions change. Your instincts adapt. You become sensitive to things you were never meant to be sensitive to, and blind to things that should have been obvious. So when I tried to fully turn toward God, it wasn't just a decision. It was a confrontation between what I wanted and what I had built inside myself over time. And that's the hidden truth. Many witches are delivered from external practices, but internally, there is still a structure that remains. A structure of thinking, a structure of perception, a structure of spiritual sensitivity that was never fully dismantled. And if it is not broken intentionally, it continues to function quietly. I began to notice it in small ways. The way certain thoughts would come naturally, the way certain fears would rise without reason, the way certain patterns felt comfortable, even though I knew they were wrong. It wasn't possession, it was influence. And influence is more subtle, more deceptive, more dangerous. Because you don't always recognize it as something separate from you. You think it's just who you are. And that's where many people get stuck. Because they leave witchcraft, but they don't renew their mind. They don't rebuild their inner foundation. They don't replace what was planted. And emptiness always gets filled. I had moments where I felt pulled, not physically, but mentally. Memories of rituals would replay in my mind. Words I used to speak would echo, almost like an invitation, not forcing me, just reminding me. And I realized something that shook me deeply. Nothing was trying to drag me back violently. It was trying to draw me back gently, because darkness doesn't always attack. Sometimes it waits. It waits for you to become tired. It waits for you to become confused. It waits for you to feel disconnected from God. And then it whispers familiar thoughts, old patterns, comfortable darkness. And if you're not grounded, if you're not fully transformed, you don't even realize you're responding to it. That's why many ex-witches stay silent about this part, because it reveals that the battle didn't end when they left. It only changed form. I remember looking at myself one day and asking a question that terrified me. Did I really leave? Or did I just step away temporarily? Because the pull was still there, not strong but present, not loud but consistent. And that's when I understood something most people are not prepared to hear. Deliverance is not just about being set free from what held you. It's about cutting off what still recognizes you. Because darkness remembers. It remembers your voice. It remembers your agreements. It remembers the access you once gave. And unless those doors are fully closed, intentionally, spiritually, completely, they remain unlocked, not wide open, but accessible. And that is the dark secret. It's not that ex-witches don't want to tell you. It's that many of them are still fighting it themselves. Silently. There is something nobody prepared me for after I left witchcraft. Not the loneliness. Not the fear. Not even the memories. What nearly destroyed me was the war inside my own mind. People think the hardest part is leaving darkness. No. Sometimes the hardest part is learning how to live without it. Because darkness had become normal to me. Not because it was good, but because it was familiar. There is a dangerous comfort in familiarity, even when something is destructive. If you have lived with it long enough, your mind begins to call it home. That was my problem. I had physically separated from the practices. I no longer participated in rituals. I no longer followed the instructions I once obeyed. I no longer surrounded myself with the people who introduced me deeper into that world. Outwardly, everything looked different, but inwardly, I was still carrying entire systems of thinking that had been built over years. And that is where the real torment began. I would wake up feeling exhausted for no reason. Not physically tired, but mentally heavy. Like my thoughts had weight. Like my mind was no longer a peaceful place, but a battlefield. One moment, I would feel hope. I would believe I was finally moving forward. Then suddenly, without warning, intrusive thoughts would hit me like a wave. Thoughts of fear, thoughts of control, thoughts of returning to what once gave me a false sense of power. And that is what many people do not understand about witchcraft. It seduces you with control. When you feel powerless in life, darkness offers an illusion that you can influence outcomes, that you can gain knowledge others don't have, that you can protect yourself through hidden means, that you can bend circumstances in your favor. It makes you feel special, chosen, aware, empowered, but it is a counterfeit. And when you leave it behind, suddenly you are confronted with something terrifying. Dependency. You realize how much of your identity was built around needing that false power. And without it, you feel exposed. I remember moments where I felt vulnerable in a way I had never experienced before. No rituals to lean on, no hidden practices to create the illusion of safety, no spiritual shortcuts, just me and the reality of my own emptiness. And that emptiness is dangerous because if you do not allow truth to fill what darkness once occupied, your mind begins negotiating with your past. That's exactly what happened to me. Not all at once, not dramatically, slowly, quietly. A suggestion here, a memory there, a thought that sounded innocent enough. Maybe some things weren't that bad. Maybe you were more powerful back then. Maybe you had more control. That is how regression begins. Not with a big decision, with small reconsiderations. And I almost fell for it. That is the part I rarely talk about. There was a period after my deliverance where I was dangerously close to returning. Not because I wanted darkness, but because I was exhausted from transformation. Transformation is uncomfortable. It requires you to let parts of yourself die. Not your body, your patterns, your instincts, your attachments, your old definitions of security. And sometimes the death of an old identity feels so painful that people mistake it for failure. They think because the process is hard, something is wrong. No, the difficulty is often proof that something real is happening. I had to confront myself in ways I never imagined. Not the dramatic version of myself from the past, the quiet version, the hidden version, the part of me that still craves certainty, control, and spiritual shortcuts. Because that was the root. Witchcraft was never just about rituals. For me, it was about hunger. A hunger for knowledge. A hunger for control. A hunger to feel safe in an unpredictable world. And until I confronted that hunger, I was never truly free. That realization changed everything. I stopped focusing only on what I had left behind, and I started paying attention to what had drawn me there in the first place. That is when healing became real, not when I simply abandoned darkness, but when I understood why darkness appealed to me. That level of honesty is painful, but necessary, because if you never confront the reason you entered something destructive, you remain vulnerable to returning through a different door. And I knew I could not survive that. Not again. There comes a moment in every hidden battle where you can no longer pretend you are okay. A moment where all the strength you thought you had disappears. A moment where you realize if something doesn't change right now, you are going to fall. That moment found me, and it didn't come in a dramatic way. There were no loud noises, no visible signs, no sudden event that anyone around me could point to and say, "This is it." It came quietly, but it hit deeply. I remember sitting alone, completely drained, not just tired, empty. The kind of emptiness that makes you question everything. I had been fighting internally for so long, resisting thoughts, resisting old patterns, trying to stay focused, trying to pray, trying to hold on. But nothing felt stable, nothing felt secure. And for the first time since I left witchcraft, I felt like I was losing. That terrified me because I knew what was on the other side of losing. I knew exactly where that road led. And I could feel myself standing at the edge of it again. Not physically, but mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And that's when something inside me broke, not in a destructive way, in an honest way. For the first time, I stopped trying to appear strong. I stopped trying to manage everything. I stopped trying to control the process. And I said something that came from the deepest part of me. I can't do this on my own. Those words may sound simple, but for someone who spent years relying on control, rituals, and hidden systems of power, that sentence was everything. Because it meant surrender, real surrender. Not just saying I wanted God, but admitting I needed Him. There's a difference. Before that moment, I wanted freedom, but I still wanted control. And you cannot have both. That night I let go, completely. No performance, no perfect words, no structure, just honesty. I spoke to God in a way I never had before. Not with rehearsed phrases, but with raw truth. I told Him everything, the fear, the confusion, the exhaustion, the temptation, the parts of me that still felt tied to my past. I didn't hide anything because I realized hiding is what kept me trapped in the first place. And something happened in that moment that I cannot fully explain. But I will never forget. The pressure lifted, not instantly like a switch turning off, but noticeably, like something that had been sitting on my chest slowly moved away. For the first time in a long time, my mind felt quiet, not empty, peaceful. There were no intrusive thoughts rushing in, no internal arguments, no pull from the past, just stillness. And in that stillness, I felt something I had been searching for since I left everything behind. Not power, not control, presence. A presence that didn't demand anything from me. A presence that didn't manipulate. A presence that didn't confuse or overwhelm. Just peace. And that's when I understood something that changed the way I saw everything. I had spent so much time trying to fight darkness that I forgot to fully embrace light. I was focused on resisting my past instead of allowing myself to be transformed in the present. That shift is what saved me, because the battle was never meant to be won by my strength alone. It was meant to be surrendered. And that doesn't mean everything became perfect overnight. It didn't. But something fundamental changed inside me. The struggle no longer felt like I was being pulled in two directions. It felt like I had finally chosen one completely, not halfway, not with hesitation, fully. And that decision created separation, not just physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. The ties that once felt active began to weaken. The thoughts that once felt convincing began to lose their power. The pull that once felt familiar began to feel foreign. And for the first time, I wasn't just someone who left witchcraft. I was becoming someone new. If you have stayed with me until this moment, then you are ready to hear the truth in its fullest form, not the softened version, not the version that sounds comfortable, but the truth that many who came out of witchcraft will never say clearly. The dark secret is this: leaving witchcraft does not automatically mean you are free from it. And I don't mean that in a dramatic or fearful way. I mean it in a real, deeply honest way. Because what you walk away from physically can still live inside you mentally. What you reject outwardly can still echo inwardly. And what you once agreed to can still try to recognize you, even after you have changed direction. That is the part many people hide, not because they are lying, but because it forces them to admit something difficult. That deliverance is not the finish line. It is the doorway, a doorway into transformation. And transformation is not instant. It is a process of rebuilding everything that was shaped in darkness: your thinking, your reactions, your desires, your sense of identity, your understanding of power. Because if those things are not renewed, then the past does not need to pull you back forcefully. You drift back naturally. And that is the most dangerous form of returning. Not through rebellion, but through familiarity. I have seen it happen. People who left witchcraft slowly begin to revisit old ideas. Not the rituals at first, just the mindset, just the curiosity, just the subtle openness. And over time, that small opening becomes a door again, because darkness does not always need permission loudly. Sometimes it only needs access quietly. And that is why I am speaking to you like this. Not to create fear, but to give you awareness, because awareness protects you. If you understand that the real battle is not just what you left, but what still lives in your thinking, then you begin to guard yourself differently. You stop assuming that time alone will fix everything. You stop believing that distance automatically equals freedom. You become intentional. You become watchful. You become grounded. Because true freedom is not just about escape. It is about replacement. You cannot remove darkness and leave emptiness. Something must take its place. Truth, light, peace. A new way of thinking, a new way of seeing yourself, a new understanding of where your strength comes from. That is what finally set me free, not just walking away, but allowing myself to be rebuilt. Completely. And I will say this clearly, because this is where many people misunderstand the power I thought I had in witchcraft. It was nothing compared to the peace I found after surrender. Because power without peace is a trap. It keeps you striving. It keeps you restless. It keeps you dependent. But peace anchors you. It stabilizes you. It removes the need to control everything. And that is real freedom. So here is my warning to you. If you have ever been involved in darkness, do not think leaving is enough. Do not think saying, "I'm done," closes every door. Go deeper. Be honest with yourself. Look at your thoughts. Look at your patterns. Look at what still feels familiar even when it shouldn't. Because that is where your real work is. And if you have never been involved in witchcraft, listen carefully. Do not be curious about something that takes more than it gives. Do not open doors you don't understand. Do not be drawn by the illusion of hidden knowledge or control, because everything has a cost, even if you don't see it immediately. I am not speaking from theory. I am speaking from experience, from mistakes, from consequences, from a journey that nearly took everything from me, but also from a place of restoration. Because freedom is real, but it is not automatic. It is chosen daily, consistently, intentionally. And if you choose it fully, not halfway, not occasionally, but completely, then what once had access to you will no longer recognize you. And that is when you are truly free. Stay aware, stay grounded, and above all, stay transformed